Welcome to a Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. No basketball to talk about. No, I'm not going to acknowledge the NBA Cup knockout round. The Grizzlies, who's getting credit in Memphis? Who deserves it? Damichael Cole and I will talk about that. The Grizzlies are rising up the power rankings. The NBA one in particular will be a focus of our conversation, and where Damichael may have Memphis in his top five. And then we're going to talk about Desmond Bane getting a much-needed breather. Or would it be better for him to just kind of be working it out on his own? We'll be talking about that and more on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Tuesday edition of the podcast. It is I, Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Always good to have Damichael riding alongside, co-hosting with me, and it's always wonderful to have you with us, dear listener, dear viewer, on each and every edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. As proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. It was a big day for us over on YouTube. Thanks to everybody that checked out the show over there. Good comments. Hey, well, you know, everyone. It's nice. It's nice when you beat the Boston Celtics, right? The big time, big market games. Hopefully, the Grizzlies can pull out a late night win over the Lakers. Spoiler alert: Damichael will have the Monday show next week solo, since that's a late night game. Yeah, breaking news. If you're an everydayer, that doesn't surprise you in the least. But hopefully we get some of that sweet, sweet Laker buzz. But we don't want to make it sound like we're not grateful for those of you that are with us each and every time an episode drops, because we most certainly are. We're very happy to be covering these Memphis Grizzlies, not just because they're good, but because they're home for Damichael and I in very different ways. Make sure you're checking out our free daily newsletter, lockedondaily.com. You see down there in the bottom right of your screen if you're watching the show on YouTube. LockedOnDaily.com. For those of you that are not watching, make sure you're checking that out, going and subscribing to our daily newsletter. It is free content from me, written words from me each and every day, plus wonderful NBA fantasy basketball content, all sorts of good stuff. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. Be an everydayer with our newsletter, not just the podcast. But of course, the podcast appreciates it too. Damichael Cole, it was a fun weekend. It was a fun episode yesterday, getting to bask in the glow of victory. But one of the things that has come up in the wake of this feel-good session, right? The Grizzlies being the number two-ish, right? There's like a half game.
Number
game
two.
It can fluctuate. Yeah.
Put some respect. Yeah, give it to them.
Well, I want to. I just try to be unbiased, right?
Okay. I get it.
So they're at number two in the Western Conference as we speak, and it's fun to say that out loud. Who deserves credit for this Grizzlies resurgence? Is it as simple as, it's crazy what happens when you have Ja Morant out on the floor. It's important to point out that Ja has not played. I think he's missed maybe 8 or 9 games. I don't have it directly in front of me, but I know he's missed several games. You got guys like Jaren Jackson Jr. who haven't missed much basketball at all for the Grizzlies so far this season. Then if you take the coaching staff, as the head coach, Taylor Jenkins, naturally gets credit. He's the one that gets his record, right? They're not asking assistant coaches' records, right? It's the head coach that gets credit for these wins and losses. That's important to point out too. Yeah. But we've talked a ton about the overturn on that coaching staff, and it's pretty noticeable the difference in this year's offense to prior iterations. So whether it's players on the court, within the coaching staff itself, how do you divvy up credit for this Grizzlies team being where they are during this self-inflicted break in NBA basketball because the NBA Cup is silly?
Yeah, everyone's not going to love my answer, but it is what it is. I think that Taylor Jenkins deserves a lot of credit right now. And the number one thing and the most obvious thing for the Grizzlies' success right now is just a little bit more fortune, I guess, on the health side. We talked about how last season started. We talked about how last season went. But guess what? Last season, when Ja Morant would miss games, they were doomed. First 25 games of the season, even the first when they started 0-6, with Marcus Smart playing those games, with Dez, with Jaren Jackson Jr. all playing. But this season, you throw Scottie Pippen Jr. in there, who has 6 double-doubles this season. And me and Joe did not rehearse this, but Joe, I'm about to throw you some quick hitters. You answer them pretty quickly. It's just going to prove my point because it's going to prove my point. But tell me 3 things that you think the Grizzlies are really good at, just the team.
I think the Grizzlies are good at scoring in the paint, which they have been throughout the process here. I think that they are good at playing in transition, right? That pace conversation that we talk about all the time. Yep. And I think that they're really strong defensively, which is another thing, which I think this is probably the point you're getting to. Not sorry to kill the lead.
I promise everyone this wasn't rehearsed.
Well, we just been together for a while now. Those are all things that the Grizzlies have been good at for some time.
And voila, it's the Taylor Jenkins principles that is kind of keying what makes this team great. You mentioned the points in the paint and things like that. They're number 1 in the NBA right now. That Celtics game, I mean, it really stood out because they're doing a lot of their work in the paint while the Celtics are just hoisting up 3-pointers. I think the Celtics,
especially against Kristaps Porzingis, that was extremely impressive to me. Because again, I've been following this team long enough.
You've seen him.
Austin, his time in Dallas, he was a nightmare for the Grizzlies being able to try to score on that dude. The way that they dominated the paint with Porzingis as a factor for the Celtics, that was extremely impressive.
It was really impressive. And the points in the paint, the defense, as you said, that's been a key call throughout the tenure of Taylor Jenkins, as well as the fact that transition scoring. They've always been near the top of the league in transition scoring, but there's a bigger emphasis right now on pace of play, which is where they've taken it to another level. And I've kind of touched on the fact that Taylor Jenkins, and this is where the confusion and the up and down opinions come on him. The way that he's handling the rotations and how many minutes guys are playing. We know Ja and Dez and Jaren aren't playing like the minutes of the typical superstars around the NBA. But I've had conversations, with the Grizzlies and asked Taylor Jenkins about the fact that right now a big part of this whole pace thing is they're learning on the fly. Taylor Jenkins said they're trying to play at speeds relentlessly that they haven't seen other teams play it. So as they get bigger sample sizes, they'll have a better idea of how many minutes they can play these guys in stretches. Like we just talked about it a couple episodes ago. We're only a quarter into the season. So as long as the results are what they've been to this point, and sure, I have certain problems with Taylor Jenkins as well, but I think he's done a good job at maximizing what this team has. This team is not a great 3-point shooting team, but to have a coach who, in a way, is coaching around that by emphasizing things like getting out in transition so you create easy opportunities. You have a coach who is emphasizing getting in the paint, touching the paint. I'm telling you, Taylor Jenkins' favorite offensive stat is the Grizzlies' points per possession when they touch the paint. This is the stat he always brings up to me when you're talking about how efficient their offense is. When they touch the paint, they're averaging over 1 point, whatever the number is, points per possession. When they don't touch the paint, at least earlier in the season, it was under 1 point per possession. So it's a big gap and it's a big emphasis. But all that is to say, that's kind of where most of my credit goes right now. Zach Kleiman has done some great things and orchestrated this roster. But I mean, there's a reason a couple of these guys, like Santi didn't get an extension. Jake LaRavia didn't get his contract picked up. And if you look at those 2 players in particular, those are 2 guys who have specifically said this system fits them better. So if we're talking about the system, I think, sure, the assistant coaches get the love at the end, get some love in there as well. But those assistant coaches had to sell it to Taylor Jenkins. He had to buy into it. And he's the one kind of emphasizing it right now.
I think that with LaRavia and Aldama, you make an interesting point because Jaren is playing for an extension, and I'm not mad at him for that. And I've talked multiple times about how they have a chance to make monopoly money, right? Like it's an absurd, like Juan Soto of the Mets. The insanity of that amount of money.
I got to get used to hearing it. Juan Soto of the Mets. Oh,
it's weird. Yeah, I know. Especially as a Washington Nationals fan
and a Braves fan. Yeah.
All these dudes that used to play for the Nationals coming back to the NL East to just pick on me.
That's tough.
But the reality is, Jaren has a chance to make not just
300 plus.
life-changing money for himself, but this is generational wealth we're talking about. Aldama and LaRavia are a level below that, right? And I think that the interesting thing about their scenario and situation is the Grizzlies were serving as a wake-up call, right? Like, we're not going to give you this level of security because you have not earned it. We need to see it. And I think that that's a level of accountability that's easier to have with players like LaRavia and Aldama compared to a player like Morant or Jaren Jackson Jr. But at the same time, those are the guys that in the margins are going to make the Memphis Grizzlies a legitimate championship contender. Every team, once you get to the top 5, which we're going to talk about here in a moment, everybody's got superstars. Everybody's got guys like John Morant, okay? How the guys below that are able to fit and mix and accentuate what your best players do, that is where it matters the most. And guys like Aldama and LaRavia coming around is going to be huge for this team. It already has been. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch that continue to play out. Let Damichael and I know in the comments, who are you giving credit to? Probably not Taylor Jenkins, and that's
who are you giving credit to? Who's the credit for you?
I think that for me, it's Taylor Jenkins. You know, I'm a little bit biased as a head coach at a much smaller level, but I do think that a lot of weight comes with that.
A lot of people aren't going to agree with this, probably.
When things go well, it's rarely ever because of you. And when things go poorly, you're the first person pointed at.
You're the fall guy.
I think that he has walked the line of a lot of tension and a lot of frustration, and he's found a way because he's earned the trust of his players. And if nothing else, and I know you know this better than anybody, Michael.
Yeah.
If nothing else, to have John Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. love you the way that they love you, that is a testament to the kind of coach and the kind of relationship builder that guy is. And that matters, especially when you're able to do that with professional athletes. That matters immensely. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, I mentioned that power ranking a moment ago. The NBA puts out their updated numbers every week. The Grizzlies make their return to the conversation with a few teams in front of them. I talked about power rankings a little bit yesterday, so I'm going to get Damichael Cole's take on where he thinks Memphis fits coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, yes, literally right now, you can go to FanDuel and you can get a chance to have $5 bet on any bet and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Maybe you get a hunch in the middle of the game that the Packers are going to go for it and have a big win behind Jordan Love, or Jaden Daniels is going to cook for the Commanders against the Saints coming up this weekend. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same exact page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com right now to join today. You will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never again will you waste a hunch, and make sure you make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Damichael, on yesterday's show, I talked about where I would have Memphis at the current state of things. I also wrote about it for our newsletter on Tuesday. My personal top 5, I have the Grizzlies at number 4. I have the Boston Celtics at number 1 because I'm a big believer in Ric Flair. To be the man, you got to beat the man. So Celtics are 1. You know, you can make an argument for them legitimately there. I have the Cleveland Cavaliers at 2. That is my current number 2 team in the Eastern Conference. Kenny Atkinson doing a phenomenal job. Who would have thunk the guy that was a good coach in Brooklyn is also a good coach in Cleveland? It's wild.
So who's 3?
3 would be the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I think that you have to acknowledge, again, we talked about stars versus stars. I think the Thunder have that, plus they have a level of depth that the Grizzlies, once they're healthy, I think the Grizzlies will have similar depth. But I don't trust that depth in a 7-game series against the Thunder at this moment. I'd have the Grizzlies 4th, and I'd have Dallas 5th. That is close to in line with what the NBA power rankings were. They had Dallas in front of Memphis, which I understand. They literally just beat the Grizzlies, right? So I'm not going to fault that. I'm not going to make fun like I do other rankings. I think that my biggest point yesterday was you look at the top 3 teams in the NBA right now. I think it's the Thunder. I think it's the Celtics, the Cavaliers. You can make an argument in any given order. That's probably the top.
I got OKC 1.
Right. I think that's fair. I want to stress that. I think the Grizzlies are the next best below that tier. And that probably includes Dallas, probably includes Houston, probably includes the New York Knicks. Which, quick side note, and I think I saw it might have been our buddy Fast Break Breakfast over on X that posted about it. It's like 2014, 2015 all over again with the Southwest Division.
Oh, yeah, the division.
Three dominant teams.
It's rough.
And the Spurs aren't bad. And then the Pelicans are enduring what the Grizzlies endured this past season. So we can empathize with the Pelicans a little bit. But anyway, I've talked enough. That's my top 5. I think it's more about tiers for me than it is individual numbers. Where would you put Memphis and, that overall top 5 feel of the NBA power rankings?
Yeah, I think the NBA power rankings has them right where they need to be right now, based on what we've seen, based on what we know. And that is in the 5th spot. OKC, I think, is kind of separated themselves right now at this point early in the season. The fact that they lost Chet Holmgren and didn't have Isaiah Hartenstein, and they really held it down. Like,
it's impressive.
6'5" Jalen Williams playing center.
Because one of the knocks, one of the things that at least I can't speak for you. Yeah. One of the things that I doubted about the Thunder was just how obscenely healthy they were last season. They have dealt with some adversity this season, and they have stayed right on course.
All the starters played 70+ games last year. Like, it just didn't feel, like a realistic thing to expect again. And lo and behold, Chet gets hurt, and now Isaiah Hartenstein is finally back for them, and they look formidable. So I have them at the top because I wouldn't even say I'm biased towards the West, but I treat the West like college football fans treat the SEC. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt a little bit if you're playing in the Western Conference as opposed to Boston Celtics and the Cavaliers getting to beat up on the Charlotte Hornets and all due respect to the Hornets, but the Hornets and teams of that nature. But here's why I have the Mavs in front of the Grizzlies. I think as of right now, the biggest question mark, the biggest thing that has to be answered for this Grizzlies team is when we get to the last 5 minutes of those games. When you're not going to be dependent on your pace as much. And we've seen both sides of the coins here lately, right? We saw them falter towards the end of the Mavs game, and we saw Jaren Jackson Jr. turn into a bona fide superstar, against the Celtics. I mean, they couldn't do anything with him. 14 points in the 4th quarter. So we've seen both sides of it. But here's the thing for me. Like, as it pertains to the Mavs, I think that Derek Lively is a better defender against Jaren than now Porzingis, he did hurt his ankle in that game. So I would say with Porzingis not being at full health in that game, I think Derek Lively was the more formidable defender, even though I didn't really touch on this, Joe, but the last 2-minute report, I won't belabor on this point for too long, but the last 2-minute report from the Dallas game did conclude that Jaren was fouled on the play that I talked about on the show when Derek Lively nudged him in the back when the Grizzlies were down 2, and he would have been going to the line. That would have tied the game, I think, at 113.
I did not read the last 2-minute report, but I can conclude after watching that game, this is the Joe Mullinax officiating report. They stunk. They were not very good.
They did.
Officiating. John Morant should have that technical rescind. He may have already had it, and I just missed it. If I'm being honest, but it's just ridiculous. Like it's that was really bad. I'm not gonna blame the loss on officiating because the Grizzlies fouled too much, but those 2 calls in particular were abysmal.
Yeah. But with all that being said, I think when it comes to the closing moments of games, one team has Kyrie Irving and Luka, 2 of the best closers in the game. The Grizzlies have Jaren, who's developing into that type of player. Ja has had his moments when he called 12, right? We've seen that. It is, to me, it's simple as I trust Dallas the last 3 minutes of a game right now more than Memphis. That could change. I can't wait. To see the Grizzlies with Zach Edey going against that front court, because the live bodies that Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively was the difference maker, it felt like, in that last game. Can't wait to see Zach Edey kind of help Memphis out on that end. And then that might flip-flop it to me, but based on what we've seen up to this point, I think 5th. And 5th is really good because you're in front of the Houston Rockets, who, I think is you talk about depth. I mean, They can throw two lineups at you just like Memphis can. But yeah, Houston is a really good team. There are a couple teams, like I think
The Knicks have come on of late.
The Knicks have come on of late. I'm still Eastern Conference.
Yeah. No, I understand.
I'm just the Celtics got it made over there. But I'm not about to ramble too much, man. Because if the Memphis Grizzlies are the lucky team to get moved over to the Eastern Conference, we'll be talking about probably some routine, at least second round appearances. But I digress. That's the one I digress for the show.
Hey, I love that. Shout out to I digress. The thing that I like the best about this ranking is you have 5 teams that are really young, right? You have it's like a rising tide and a changing of the guard. You would never be able to tell that if you watched like ESPN or TNT.
Joe got to get that shot in there.
So many talking heads talking about what LeBron's got to do to get back in the hunt. You're talking about the 10 seed in the Western Conference, man. And I think that might be something that maybe we talk about on tomorrow's show, partner, because that's a separate topic in and of itself. The NBA numbers are down a little bit. People aren't who could have predicted?
I don't even think the Rockets have been on national TV much, and we know
who could have predicted that the NBA Cup did not spark interest in the National Basketball Association. Who could have possibly?
You've been waiting to say that. You've been waiting to say that.
Who could have predicted it? I think that there's a serious issue. And this isn't just a Memphis blogger podcaster being jealous. I think there's a serious issue with how the NBA is currently covering their product. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that because Lord knows we don't have basketball to talk about because it's the NBA Cup, brother. It's the knockout stage that the Grizzlies mercifully did not get into. So,
the cool thing about the ratings and the rankings right now, since we're talking about the Cup, and I just thought about this because I don't know all the matchups off the top of my head out loud. But the fact that the Grizzlies have 2 games against the Nets and the Lakers that are very, very winnable games, and the 3 teams that are right there with the Grizzlies, the Mavs, the Rockets, and the Thunder, are all in the NBA Cup. So if you just do the math, two of them are going to have to lose another game. So the Grizzlies really could take advantage of that because you get the Nets and the Lakers, 2 games. You have a really good chance at winning. While they got to go battle it out against one another. And I think one of those games, I think Dallas plays Oklahoma City, for example.
Yeah, that sounds right.
In that case, if Oklahoma City wins, you get a little bit of cushion from Dallas. As you mentioned, they're a half game behind you. I think the Rockets are something like a half. They have 8 games in the loss column, too. Both Dallas and Houston have 8 games in the loss column. So process of elimination. And if one of those teams wins it and OKC loses, then you're closer to the 1 seed. So that's one way to look at it.
And the precedent has already been set that whoever wins the NBA Cup, their head coach is going to get fired. So it works out nicely for whoever.
Mark Daynog, you better look out.
Duck your head, get in the bushes. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to talk about Desmond Bane. A lot has been made of his struggles of late. Is the time off here a positive for Des? We'll talk about that coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by the good folks over at Mint Mobile. With big wireless providers, what you see is never what you get. Somewhere between the store and your first month's bill, the price you thought you were paying magically skyrockets. With Mint Mobile, you'll never have to worry about gotchas ever again. When Mint Mobile says $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan, they mean it. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month by going to mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. That's mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speeds slower above 80 or 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. We close out this edition of the podcast talking about Desmond Bane. A lot has been made of his struggles. He was particularly for the Grizzlies, but not his best game before that 4th quarter against Boston. Obviously, he didn't play against the Wizards. It's nice that they're not playing in the NBA Cup in a way because it's essentially a bye week here, right? They get 4 random days off in the middle of the regular season.
They need them too. Yeah.
They're a little banged up. We know that already. Again, guys have been playing, more guys than we're used to, but that doesn't mean that they don't have bumps and bruises. Do you think with the oblique, which we're seeing a little bit more of, maybe it's just my attention, I'm noticing it more, but obviously the Magic know all about oblique injuries, the Orlando Magic, another really good young team in the NBA. Maybe we need to give Dez a little bit more grace. Maybe that's a harder injury to return from, especially when it comes to something, I know you know this, that is so important in terms of technique and how you shoot your shot. The oblique muscle probably is more important in that than people realize. Is it something where he just needed a couple days away? You know Dez pretty well. Do you think I mean, obviously he won't use that as an excuse, but is he a guy that kind of works through it? How do you think Bane is approaching these few days where he's shown flashes of the guy that we've come to know and love, but he certainly has struggled as of late?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, what I've learned about Desmond Bane, well, first I'll start with a fact, and the fact is the guy never really dealt with injuries in his whole life before getting to the NBA. He didn't really have them. He never missed a game in college, didn't miss a game, at Seton Catholic in high school. So he's always been durable. And even earlier in his career, it pretty much started that way. So with all that being said, I do think that, it's something he has to be mindful of. Because of that, you have this want to be back out there and whatnot. But I think, with everything that I've learned about Dez over the last couple years, how he's dealt with these injuries, I don't think it's much to the fact of the oblique being a problem or him, playing through it for one. So the main thing with Dez, I think, is him. He is the biggest guy who has to adjust in this offense. So you talk about now that they have, a week pretty much to break down some things, to look at some things. Taylor Jenkins can kind of dissect the information a little bit more in terms of how I can put Desmond Bane in advantageous situations like John Morant, like Jaren Jackson Jr. And I think that's going to be a big part of, Desmond Bane's numbers getting closer to what we're used to. But typically, if you look through the history of big threes, there's always one guy, at least, whose stats tend to take more of a dramatic drop than the other two. I mean, if you look around the NBA right now, like, I think I'll go back to the Heatles' big three, right? You remember Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, Chris Bosh got together. Dwayne Wade and LeBron James' stats, at least in the early part before Dwayne Wade started really dealing with injuries, they were both still, right around the same numbers-wise. A little small drop-off, but right around the same. But the drop-off happened with Chris Bosh. He was the one who got a big chunk of his volume sliced out. Same thing with Golden State. If you go back to Klay Thompson, he was the one where the stats you saw the drop-off as opposed to Steph Curry and Kevin Durant, as much as him when that trio was formed. And if you do the current NBA, first one that comes to mind is the Suns with Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, and Kevin Durant. Devin Booker and Kevin Durant both averaged, I think, 27 a game last season. But Bradley Beal, I think he was under 20. So that's just how it goes. It's one basketball, as a lot of coaches always like to remind players. It's one basketball. And in this case, Jaren Jackson Jr. is efficiently and quickly getting his in 27, 28 minutes. Ja Morant is doing what Ja Morant does. And Desmond Bane is having to find his way. And that's kind of where we'll see the growth in him. I have no concerns. Again, the numbers, they'll go up, the shooting percentages and whatnot. But, yeah, I do think, getting back to the original point, the break is important, but not just physically, mentally as well, in terms of, I think it's an understanding part. Dez has to understand when and how he will get the keys to the offense, like when Ja does, when Jaren's out of the game, or like we saw when Ja sat for that 2-minute stretch against the Celtics, and it was the Jaren Jackson Jr. show. So they'll just got to figure out how is Dez going to get some of those type of situations as well that can flow within the offense, but also kind of ignite him going forward.
Hit us up in the comments. Let us know on X at Damichael C, at Joe Mullinax, what you're thinking about this break for Desmond Bane. People forget how good Chris Bosh was in Toronto. They really do, before the Heatles came together. Chris Bosh was a Hall of Fame level player before he ever got to Miami. So I do think that there is something to be said for that. And I think if you combine that, because Jaren's offense being a development is really just in the last year and a half or so, you combine that with this new look offense and how it could impact a guy like Dez, whereas, as we talked about earlier in the show, really helping a guy like Asante Aldama or Jake LaRavia, it's just finding your footing. And that happens at different speeds and different paces for everybody. I have full confidence that Desmond Bane is going to bounce back. Tomorrow, we're bouncing back here on another episode of Locked On Grizzlies. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier, partner. I think a good place to start is the fact that it feels like that changing of the guard is almost fully here now, right? Kawhi Leonard still coming back from injury, hasn't been out on the court very much, if at all. And again, shout out to the Clippers, keeping their heads above water despite not having Kawhi out there.
That's going to be a good team if they can get the claw back. But
absolutely. But Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, LeBron James, they all have something in common right now. They're all in the play-in, right? But yet, if you pay attention to media coverage of the NBA, they are the ones dominating the air. Yeah. Whereas, again, it's not just Memphis, Oklahoma City, Houston.
People ain't talking about Houston, man.
Houston is one of the biggest media markets in the country, right? I think it might be number 3 or number 4 in terms of market size. So, I think that it's a self-inflicted wound for the NBA at this point, Damichael. What about you? And again, this is kind of a softball into maybe the leadoff for tomorrow's show.
Yeah, I mean it's noteworthy, and as someone who kind of works in the media and whatnot, and Joe, I know you understand it as well. A big part of this is, and we'll talk more about it tomorrow, but when they're kind of going through the segments of what they are outlining for a show, it's kind of what the consumer is going to eat up as well. Sure. And they know, hey, let's talk about LeBron James and let's talk about Steph Curry. Those things tend to sell. But at the same time, there was once upon a time that no one knew this 14-year-old kid out of Akron, Ohio, and you had to put some, you had to put some buzz behind them, right? There was once upon a time nobody knew this little scrawny kid, at Davidson, shooting all these 3-pointers. So we'll talk about it. But yeah, that's where I am on it.
Are you saying that people write content because they think people will click on it or download it? Is that why Yuki Karamura gets so many?
You figured it out. You cracked the code, Joe. You cracked the code. You cracked the code.
Is that why Yuki and Ja are best buds? I know they do have a good relationship. I'm just being facetious. Sounds like a good place for us to talk about and start off our Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Because again, Lord knows we don't have Grizzlies basketball to talk about. Today's episode, remember, you can catch it on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, wherever you get podcasts. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing. Become an everydayer if you haven't already done so. Make sure you're subscribing to the Locked On Grizzlies daily newsletter. LockedOnDaily.com is where you can find that. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. Find the Grizzlies icon, Locked On Grizzlies icon. Click, subscribe. Let my words and the words of others covering the NBA, fantasy basketball, and elsewhere get into your inbox for free each and every day. Again, we'll be back with you tomorrow. For Damichael Cole, I am Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, continue to make us a part of your Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. Until next time, have a good one.